You're here for season 7 of the Whole Horse Podcast, now at 110 episodes and counting. I'm your host, Alexa Linton, coming to you from Vancouver Island in Canada. I can't wait to continue to share thought-provoking, edge-pushing, geeky, and often challenging conversations with horse professionals from all areas of our industry who are working to make horses' lives better. This season, you can look forward to deep dives into equine bodywork and cranial work with my friend and colleague, Elise Miki, and much more on the specifics of creating enriching, healthy horse spaces, an area I'm particularly passionate about. I'm so excited that you're here listening in, meeting great horsey humans, and hopefully learning a new thing or two about horses and yourself. Let's get started. Hi, everyone, and welcome back. You're here for the Whole Horse Podcast. It's Alexa, and today I'm really pleased to be welcoming my friend of over 15 years and my colleague, Jodine Buydens, is here on the podcast, everyone. Welcome, Jodine.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So happy to be here.
Oh, so happy to have you. So Jodine has informed me this is her very first podcast, which is very exciting that she's here with us. And I hope that it's going to be a good one. And I hope it's the first of many as well, because Jodine has a great deal to share and so much wisdom. And I've been very grateful to have you as a part of my life for this long. I've learned so much from you on a number of levels about horses and friendship and business and all sorts of things. So I always it feels so nice to have a connection with you here and start to share you with my world a little bit. So that's awesome. So I want to get started here. I know about your journey with horses to a point, but I know a lot of my listeners maybe don't know you. To give you some perspective, Jodine lives about, an hour from me here on the island. So we're fairly close together. So can you share, Jodine, just a little bit about your journey with horses and where it's brought you to in the present moment? So I know that's a big question, but the Coles notes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. All right. Yeah, it's been a long journey. I think the important parts to highlight are just like I started out as this horse crazy kid who wouldn't leave my parents alone about wanting to ride horses. And by the time I was in the second grade, we went back to Scotland, where my parents are from, for the summer, and they decided I could learn to ride. And turns out I was actually terrified and I fell off all the time. So it was not what I had dreamed up, but I had this passion. And then when we moved back, or not moved back, but came back at the end of the summer, I kept riding here in weekly riding lessons. And I always like to share this because I think it really puts perspective on my journey and where you can end up, is that one of my first riding instructors actually took my mom aside and said, "Are you sure you want to keep spending your money on Jodine's riding? Because she doesn't really seem to be progressing." And why I like to share that is because when things really started to shift for me was, a handful of years later, I got my first pony Quantez. And that was when my confidence started to kick in, because it was built on relationship. It was built on, I spent every spare minute at the barn. I did everything with her. I was scared of riding her when I first started, but by the end I would do anything on her. And I think that's really important to know that. And then, so from there, my background, then I was in pony club. Then I got very into the competitive hunter jumper circuit. So I did that, as a teenager and a junior rider. And I actually thought that I was planning that I was going to have a career with horses. And I went off to do that. And I had this brutal awakening when I had all these horses to work with and do in a day and ride and care for and do all these things. And I didn't have the time to connect with them.
Mm.
So it was very different for me. And so I took a little break, did a little traveling, and then got a young horse named Apollo. And I'd at the time read Monty Roberts' book and said, you know what, I want to go down and learn from him. And that started me on another journey, in that I really dove into the world of horse psychology, body language. And I was in California 6.5 years altogether. But I did everything from, I worked my way through Monty's courses and was one of his instructors. But I also groomed and rode for a Grand Prix dressage rider. I was a coach at a hunter jumper barn. I started young draft crosses that were sales horses. I groomed at an Arab farm. Like I worked in an equine rehab facility. I did absolutely everything with horses and really just immersed myself in their world. And what I found was the big game changer for me was when I started to understand their psychology and the body language, I could apply it to whatever I was doing and I could have those relationships. So then when I moved to a big hunter jumper barn as an assistant trainer in Los Angeles, I had those. It didn't matter if I was riding 8 horses a day, I could connect quickly. I learned how to build those connections without needing the endless hours that I'd had as a kid. And then, of course, though, I was drawn back here to the island and I came back and had my own business, Harmonious Horsemanship, for years and did a lot of starting young horses, leadership with horses, worked with behavior issues. And then I got pulled into, it's quite a journey, then I got pulled into the world of equine facilitated wellness, because what I found was that the horses were always showing people themselves. And I really understood that that was part of the work and part of why I was helping is I would work with the client, we would work through something with their horse, and then I'd come back the next week and they would tell me how they used their same tools with their mother-in-law. And it had really caused a shift in the relationship or with their kids. And so that was my journey with that. And that really just became an integral part of everything I do. And and then I ended up being the equestrian program director at Queen Margaret's School for I think 6.5 years. And what I loved about that was really bringing all those concepts of relationship with horse psychology, body language into the program there. Because I think what I'm probably most passionate about is when I started out as a young professional in the horse industry, it was presented as either or. Like I could focus on, I felt like I had to choose. Did my passion for riding jumping horses, or did I want to have deep connections with them and understand them and do all that? And I just don't believe that it's either or. I believe that we can actually make the world better for people and horses if we look at how do we integrate it all together. So that was a kind of a long answer, but it's really the that my life has taken.
And I love that because it's, to me, what I'm hearing is that one of your roles has been sort of a translator, people to horse, which I totally see, like, and have witnessed many times with you, right? Is this sense that there is this, you become a bridge, and you don't talk about it a ton, but I know that you are an exceptionally intuitive human. Like your connection to your 5, subtle senses is very strong. Do you think that that's been a part of why you've been able to translate or, sort of be that play that role for horses and people, and with horses as well, just between you and horses?
Absolutely. And it's like we chatted quickly before this started, and the word soul contracts came up in another context. But that's a little bit like, I often feel that that's one of the things that I've been called here to do, is to work as that bridge and translator in many aspects, whether it be helping that connection between horses and people, or helping that connection between, the different industries within the horse industry, whatever that may look like that's definitely it. And then I think when it comes to that intuitive piece, I think that's in a lot of ways come naturally to me, and in a lot of ways been refined by the horses. Like they really have been my greatest teacher in that, and in tuning in and trusting it and understanding how to use it for good.
Yeah, for sure. I want to come back around and circle back around to this because I'm so curious around how you formed those connections so quickly with the horses, in California. And even now, like I've seen this with you where a horse will be like, oh, it's Jodine. They just kind of find themselves in that. And it's quite something to witness. But I also want to hear from you because this, I've also been privileged enough to see your connection specifically with Breeze, but with your other horses. And Breeze was one of the most clear, like she kind of reminded me a lot of Diva that way. So clear, so straightforward, not straightforward, that's not the word, but there was just this like presence in her. And just wondering how that has potentially influenced your journey, that connection with her.
Oh, definitely. I got Breeze when I was in California,
Yeah.
um, way back, and I always laugh because she was given to me as a sales pony, and I was young and naive, and I was like, oh, great, I'll just do all this stuff with her, and I'll find her a good home and sell her. And it didn't end up like that. There was a lot of lessons she had for me. And then I laugh in that I eventually did sell her to a good friend. And then she ended up a few years later being given back to me. So it was very clear that she was supposed to be in my life. And the few years that we were apart, we were developing ourselves away from each other. But I think she's probably a huge reason that I do have that ability with horses, is that those early lessons with her were so much about learning how I influenced the relationship.
Mm-hmm.
So if I wasn't regulated in my nervous system, if I had judgments, what expectations, she was such a sensitive pony that really affected her, and she would show it to me, and she had no tolerance for it. And at the same time, it was like through her really learning just to accept her for who she was and really tune into what did she want to do. And that was part of when I did sell her for that period of time that she stayed down in California when I came back. That was actually because that's what she wanted. She was like, it was like she started to be a school pony. She's really loved that. And that wasn't going to be her life with me up here at that time. And I think that is probably the biggest thing. I taught an online course last week, and what someone reflected to me at the end of it was that what she picked up, her biggest takeaway was this idea that like her horse is a very oral horse that tends to bite a bit, and was this concept like she went, oh, he is who he is. And it's about how do I work with him within who he is. And I think that's the relationship I have with horses is they're individual, unique, emotional beings like us. They have unique personalities and needs. And how do I, like, if I'm showing up with a horse, it's like, how do I support them in figuring out what that is in the human world?
Mm-hmm.
Because for a horse that is very oral, like my horse Caesar is very oral, right? But biting isn't actually really an issue with him because he knows the boundaries of that. That's not, like those are behaviors that, hey, I don't want to be close or share space with you. When you're doing that, that's not acceptable to bite me. And he also knows that I create time for him to be playful, to be oral, to have those interactions that instinctually comes from within him. So it's like, how I've engaged with it in a positive way, and then taught him how to keep himself safe with other humans by not doing it in an inappropriate way.
Yeah, for sure. And I've witnessed Caesar in that space as well. And it's really neat to see like how you've supported him to express himself in his fullness, right? Because he's a guy, he's a guy. Like he's just, yeah, and he's still at, how old is he now?
He'll be 31 in March.
Man, still full of beans,
Yeah.
Yeah. And I love that. And that piece with Breeze of almost like, I really resonate with this. I think because of my mares as well, this space where they're sort of really hold you to a clarity or a way of being that is going to really foster those relationships, that trust. And that's sort of what I'm hearing you saying here, is that's a part of what you take to these other relationships with other horses. Hey.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And I think just a deep presence too. Like I think Breeze was such a space holder.
Yeah.
Like people would just be in her presence and they could just drop into this peace and become so still with her. And so with it strong within themselves, if that makes sense, in a really quiet way. And I think that I really learned that from her. And it's almost like she did it with humans and then taught me to do it well with humans, but also with horses.
I love that. I love that. And like what a powerful teaching and legacy as well. Bree's crossed over now. It's been
It'll be a year in
a year
March.
in March. Yeah, I was gonna say.
Mhm.
And so yeah, right up that sense of how much she brought for, even when she was at QMS, how many students she touched to um, sort of help build these skill sets, right? I really saw that in her. She took her job, how do I say it? She took her job very seriously in that manner, if that makes sense.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. And really, like, I think this is where that solo contract piece comes back in, where it's like she was very, very connected to what she was here to do. It felt
Hmm.
like with Breeze. Hey.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, I think it's really interesting when, when you look at that kind of intuitive animal communication side of
Mm-hmm.
things, way back when we were in California, long before I even had heard the term equine facilitated wellness or equine assisted learning or anything, um, I remember Bree saying to me, like, yeah, I want to help, like I just got this sense from her of wanting to help kids. And it wasn't about riding,
Yep.
right? And it was this holding space for kids. And I was like, wow, I don't know what that looks like. And then, full circle, that wasn't, I didn't try and make it happen, which I think is an important part of that journey. It was, I didn't
Mm-hmm.
try it, make it happen. It just landed. And then full circle, all those years later, it kind of unfolding that that's what she came back to me to do. And that's what she was able to do. But I think that's probably one of the lessons from her too in working with horses is the idea of we can have an intention,
Yep.
but we can't get stuck on an agenda.
Yeah.
It's really like the really deep work, the lessons come in following where where they want to take us.
Mm.
Even if and I'm not just talking in the terms of the equine facilitated wellness or leadership development, even just in horsemanship in our personal horses, our riding horses, they'll take us on a journey. They're in our lives for a reason. And that slowing down and tuning in is such an important piece of that.
Mm. And I love this too because, and I'm sure a lot of listeners are out there just going, oh yeah, if you reflect back on your relationships with specific horses, uh what that relationship brought to you and to that horse, and sort of, yeah, like you say, how it weaved through these spaces, because like it's like we don't necessarily know where we're headed with them, but we might get clues or sort of a sense of, oh, they really like this thing, or that's not really what they're really not showing us through, body language, various things, that they don't enjoy this piece. But I think for a lot of us, if we start to look back, it's like, oh yeah, that was a thing. There was this sense of we were meant to be connected, and that, gave me these sort of treasures along my journey, right? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's so lovely. I wanted to ask you because I know that a lot of your work now is around sort of leadership and actually helping the people, not necessarily horse people, like people in other, yeah, industries, doing their own personal work, working through different things. Yeah, can you share a little bit about what you've seen that horses, I don't know, bring to the table, embody in terms of like leadership qualities and teaching positive leadership to the humans that you work with?
Oh, absolutely. And I think it ties in, I laugh in that my business for years, and I still do a little bit of it, was through harmonious horsemanship, was teaching horse people about leadership with horses.
Mm-hmm.
And now a lot of what I do is teaching non-horse people about leadership through horses.
Yes.
But it all applies to the same thing in looking at, horses' natural model of leadership. And I think why I'm so passionate about it is what I have learned from the horses is for horses, if we always just look to what they would be their natural state, so in the wild, and understand that it gets a little distorted sometimes in domestication, but we look at to what the natural state is that horses naturally live together in a herd and as a family unit. And, there's a lead mare in that herd, but she's not, I always say she's the wisdom of the herd. She works with the stallion and he acts as the protector, but she's the wisdom. And she probably is going to have a dominant, assertive personality, but she's not necessarily going to be even the most aggressive mare in the herd. She's the lead mare because she's the one who's best equipped to ensure the safety and survival of the entire herd. And I think when we look at leadership with horses or learning from horses in regards to that, it's so important. I look at it in two contexts. I go, okay, well, if we're talking about it in terms of horsemanship, we've brought horses into our human world. And I think that's one of the reasons also to step back to what you said about how you feel that horses just are quite feel my presence, is that I really believe that it's my job, if I'm going to be a leader in the horse human herd, to ensure their safety and survival and to understand their perspectives, what's important to them, what's needed for them to feel safe, what's needed to meet their needs, what's needed for them to thrive in the herd. So that's one aspect of it. And then the other is looking at it for what we can learn as humans is horses would never understand our concept of hiring or electing a leader, and that a leader could stay in charge because they've been given that job, assigned that job.
Right. Yeah.
For horses, it's in the moment, who is best equipped in the moment. And it's dynamic in a herd. So in a herd of horses, even if there's a lead mare, if a situation arises that's not in her strength, there'll be another horse that steps up and addresses the issue or the challenge and then steps back down again. And I think that's so powerful. And when working with non-horse people, so powerful for them, not only to learn that, but to have that experience and have that experience of in the moment shifts. So if you imagine a non-horse person learning to lead a horse, and then, maybe they're not having the confidence or the belief that the horse is going to stay with them. And then you can, what I like to do is just ask a simple question like, well, what would it be like if you just knew? What would it feel like in your body if you knew that they would stay with you and they trusted your leadership? And then the person will imagine that and then start to step forward. And the horse responds to that shift so instantly that it has such a powerful impact on people that the horses can give this honest in the moment feedback that is also probably with Diva, I'm sure, I know with Breeze was also sometimes a little bit of a bullshit radar too. You know what? You might be saying all the right things to the humans around you, but I'm not buying it. And until you actually get honest with yourself, that's what it looks like. And I think, that's the power of working with horses, is that ability and looking at even understanding why that is, understanding that if we looked at the brain of horses and humans, we have our reptilian brain is so similar and very, how our nervous systems work. So we can learn that, and we can learn skills with horses about how to regulate our nervous systems and how to co-regulate our nervous systems. We can look at the limbic system, which deals with relationship and emotion and connection, very similar in capacity and size in horses to humans. So they experience emotions like we do, and they experience relationships. But what they don't have, where it's different, is that prefrontal cortex, the part of our brain that creates story and innovates, which can be amazing as humans, but it also can be such a challenge. Because when a horse feels an emotion, they don't create a story around it. They just notice the sensations in their body and then decide what to do about it, right? Whereas we create stories about why we feel that way. And so I think I like to think of it as it's those similarities of the nervous system and the limbic system are such a great connection point with horses, and we have so much to learn. And then that difference allows them, because they can't create stories or innovate or go in that way, their brains don't work the way ours do in that way. They very much live in the present moment. So we can really learn from them how to kind of step out of story or step out of judging a situation by the past or the future and just noticing what is right now. And I think that's what's so magical about them.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. It's like even a state change that seems so subtle to us become like is so impactful, and I think once we start to practice that and see that, it's like, oh, this is a thing. And even though the humans in your life may not be as much of a barometer of like, hey, like this is stuff is needing some support here. I'm not feeling settled in your presence or whatever it is. When we're with horses, they're not gonna beat around the bush around stuff like that, right? Especially certain ones. It's like they're very clear,
Yeah.
This is not working for me.
Yeah, and because they don't really like, they're like, I don't know who you are. It doesn't matter what your job title is, how much money you make, if you're the one who pays my board bills. They don't understand relationship or in that way. You're just the person that's either making them comfortable or uncomfortable in that moment. And I think that that's like really came to be for me about how much I learned. Like I touched base on the nervous system piece.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, that's part of me really trusting my intuition and my body sensations and all of that came from horses, and starting to be able to identify like they were co-regulating with they are co-regulating with us all the time. And so when I was working with horses, primarily spending my day working with horses with behavior issues, I had to be aware of like, okay, when I'm feeling activation in my nervous system, I had to start to be able to differentiate, is it mine or
Mm-hmm.
is it theirs? Because if it's theirs, then if I can realize that it's not mine, and it's easier to regulate my own nervous system and bring myself into a more balanced state again, and then they can find their way back down and meet me there, right? And so learning to do that, and then having that, like I always think that, the horses always take it like one step further than I expect.
Yeah.
So for years, that's what it was like. And I was like, oh, this is really cool. I can tell what the difference is. This the horses or is this mine? And then one day I was working a young horse in the round pen and the horse had a lot of trauma. And I was working him in the round pen and his owner was watching. And I started to notice like activation of my nervous system, clenching of my stomach, tension of my body, my heart pounding a little bit of perspiration starts. And I tuned in and I'm like, nope, not mine. And then I tuned in with him and I was like, that's weird. It's not his either. We're both actually really fine. And what was happening was he was cantering, which was new for him. That's when he used to really
Uh-huh.
just kind of lose it, right? Get triggered. But I was like, I'm fine. He's fine. And then I remembered his owner,
Yeah.
who had been there for a lot of the experiences that were tough with him. And I just, as I was working with him, said, hey, how are you doing right now? And then she's like, actually, I'm having a bit of a hard time. This is like I'm feeling a lot of anxiety right now. And so as I was working with him, I gave her some tools to help kind of calm herself down and regulate her nervous system. But then I remember thinking, well, okay, so how cool is that? That
Yeah.
now I've developed through just fine-tuning it with the horses, I've developed the ability to differentiate what nervous system around me it is. And then from a leadership lens, how incredible is that to be able to support
Mm.
my herd or my team if I can actually go into those intricacies of,
Mm-hmm.
oh, what's going on with what this horse or this person in this moment, and how do I support that?
Amazing. Amazing. So I want to ask a question here that I is more specific on this point. For you, when you're tuning in to those uh, signs, shall we call them? So the changes, okay, my gut tightens, my heart rate goes up, like you say, like I'm sweating a little bit, like those signs of either dysregulation or adrenal response, or I'm going into a little bit more of a sympathetic piece, which I think most of us, especially right now in the world, are experiencing more often. It's, I notice this now, which is interesting with riding. So since my illness, and since things have happened, my confidence in my body, and therefore my sort of sense of, am I going to be okay in the saddle, has shifted. And so on the ground, I'm pretty well regulated. And then the minute I'm up in the saddle, it shifts. And I'm like, okay, this is interesting. Like a place where I've felt fairly at home for a really long time feels quite different. Right. And so for you, when you have those sort of sensations, what is the work? What is the process for you to, if you are personally, say, dysregulated or feeling an adrenalized response, what's your work there for yourself?
Um, really, I think there's a few different things that I do, but one is just the noticing and not having judgment. Like I really love the concept. I'm super into mental performance and mindful mental performance as well. And this concept of like fused versus differentiated. And what that means is when I'm fused, I see my experiences and my emotions and my thoughts as who I am. And when I'm differentiated, I'm able to see them as this is an experience I'm having and notice it and be aware. And that's a big part of it, is being able to actually just like track it and go, oh, it's almost like instead of saying I'm feeling activated, oh, I notice my nervous system feels activated.
Yeah.
Right. So there's that separation from it. And then, it's often I use breath work, which will actually help it. And then I'll also track, like, is there spots in my body where can I find some comfort and relaxation? Or how can I do it? Can I use my senses to bring myself in the present moment? Or if I'm in the saddle, it might be, oh, I'm going to reach forward and touch my horse's neck and just notice the physical sensations. So using tools of what's called resourcing, or touching, like rubbing my hand slowly across my leg, whatever that may be, that actually work to help bring us back into kind of the present moment with our body. So I'll do things like that. I've also learned to slow down and pause and trust the wisdom of my body. So to actually, like, instead of automatically overriding, which I did for years, I'd be like, you shouldn't be scared, Jodine, right? You shouldn't be feeling fear.
Yes, right.
Is to actually slow it down and go, okay, I'm noticing these, I've found comfort. And then what is actually going on right now? Like, is this actually a moment where I'm just anticipating, and I have stories, or is this actually a moment where, yeah, maybe I should get off and turn my horse out in the round pen and let them get some energy out, and actually giving myself permission to explore. And how that evolved for me was starting out, when I started noticing these things, I would notice, and then I would override, and then sometimes I would land in the dirt because I, on a young horse, and I was, you just need to be more brave, Jodine. So there was that, the hard knocks way step of the process. Then the next step of the process was giving myself permission to explore and try. So if I wasn't sure if I should get off or not, giving myself permission to get off and maybe do a little groundwork and see what happened, and then see if I felt more comfortable getting on. And then what would happen is sometimes I would get off and then realize I probably didn't need to get off. I would probably find it. It was just like this kind of story that I had created about what could happen. Other times I got off and went, wow, I'm sure glad I got off. That was a massive buck they just let out. Wouldn't have stuck that great. And understanding that, and that goes to the horse psychology piece of really accepting that that's them, like, hey, you know what? If they're really fresh and they need to buck, I need to create it so what's a safe environment for both them and I for them to do it. Instead of going, well, because I think I'm the boss, I think you're just going to have to hold it in together for the ride, because they might not be able to.
Yeah.
Right. So that ties into the horse psychology piece of like going, okay, what do I need to do? And then I think now I'm probably at the point where, not 100% of the time, but most of the time I can actually almost track the scenarios and go, okay, do I need to get off? What do I need to do? Or, oh, what do I need to feel comfortable in this moment? Like maybe I just need to spend a few minutes walking around. Or sometimes it's actually, for me, because I get really perfectionist about jumping, I'll check in and I'll be like, oh, the only thing I'm actually worried about is perfectionism and what people will think of me. And then
Right.
in that case, I go, oh, I better pull out some of my mental performance, sports psychology strategies and put them in place. But that's a whole different beast to work with than I'm actually super intuitive and I'm on a horse that's wild and I can sense it.
Yeah.
But it took me, it was a journey, let's say it was a journey to get to where I am now of exploring and allowing myself to explore.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love that I've had those experiences, and I'm sure many of you listening have had these experiences where you've had that little voice in the back of your mind that says, you really should get off now. Like in this moment, this would be, and then the overriding voice is often, no, I'm good. Like it'll be fine, And so I really like that delineation too between like, okay, when is it something that I'm actually having maybe like an intuitive hit of like there is potentially an action you need to take here to, not land in the dirt, so to speak. And then when is it something I'm working, like I know for myself, it's often a state thing right now where I'm actually working through rather than that piece, like my own stuff around it. Which has been a really interesting journey. I actually went for a riding lesson the other day on someone else's horse because I thought to myself, what are my baby steps to find my change in state and find my joy in riding again? Because what's happening is because I'm riding more scared, I guess, in some ways, it's not enjoyable in the way that it was for anybody, for Diva or for I. And we don't have a particularly good place to ride. And so it's just this challenge overall to connect back to my state. And so I found it really interesting as I took this step to ride a very, very well-trained gelding with supervision and all of that, and the possibility of not worrying about him and just having this opportunity to check into myself in that time. It was so amazing because it was like, oh, that little iceberg of tension can fall away. And that little, coiled up space can unwind. And all of a sudden I was in joy. And I haven't felt that for a while, in the saddle. It's like as those things fell away, I was like, oh, there is my passion and love for riding. Like there it is. And I had this huge smile on my face and I'm laughing and I could just feel this sense of the shift. It went from this thing where my body's like, am I okay? Am I safe? To like, I'm playing, I'm open, I'm remembering how good this is, Yeah. It was quite cool. Yeah.
Yeah. And then like, here's a really cool tool. Like one of the things that I play around with then is, so now that you have that fresh memory in your body is I'll then, when I have that, then spend some time every day visualizing it and really bringing it back so I can feel it in the cells of my body, so that then maybe as you get on Diva, before you get on, you visualize your ride on this other horse and you remember what it is. And then as you sit on the saddle with her, before you even, close your leg and ask her to walk on, just taking a few minutes breathing and going and having that visualization. So it's really cements that state in the cells of your body so you can bring it back. It's like, that's just a little tool that I love to tap into because there's that side of, I think we can get really focused on which needs to happen is unwinding the past or the trauma or whatever that is. And that needs to happen. But there's also this, like, I love the idea of like, how do we create a new imprint in the cells of our body and in our nervous system of like, how do we work not just to work with the pieces that are struggling, but how do we work to support them and start to create support in our nervous system and kind of at a cellular level, because that's what's going to help us stay positive with our emotions and with our physical state and with our minds and all of that. So I love to always look at tools like that.
I love that. And it was so interesting, actually, like that day, I just kept coming back to it because it was just such a highlight for me. It was such a like, oh, that feeling of, something that for years has been that for me, that positive, that joy, that play, that, when we cantered, like, oh yeah, this is amazing. And just letting him, have his head and just feeling that speed and power, like all those things started to kind of come back into my cells and I almost like remind myself of, remember when, like, this was
Yeah.
this was the thing. And I just like, yeah, I love that sort of reminder from you of that practice. I think it's so, so crucial because, yeah, like you say, we can do this other part of it of unwinding the other things, but then what's the feeling? Because for some people, the riding isn't the thing, it's not the thing that lights them up or is joyful. And for others, it's like that's a part of our, shall we say, soul contract with our horses, is that piece, right, is like actually embodying that connective freedom, shall we call it, with our horses. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's so true. And I think that that's part of like, when we look at connecting and our relationship with horses is, I think there's a huge permission piece to, there's so much expectation and so much expectation in the horse industry, and that permission piece. So I have horses where I'd say my connection that numerous horses I feel like I have a soul contract with, and like with Breeze or my mare Izzy, who you knew,
Yep.
neither of them were about riding.
Yep. Yeah.
Like it really wasn't. Caesar and I, it's not about riding, but him and I could enjoy riding together. But I have other horses, Teddy from,
Yep.
Teddy, who wasn't my horse, but him and I are that connection, but that connection was built around riding and jumping. And it was one of those things where people who you wouldn't think would say it. I remember one day I hadn't seen him in a while and I went to visit and I was jumping him around and someone went, oh my gosh, I can just see the connection that you and that and joy that you and that horse share together. Right. Because that was it. And I think that it's giving ourselves permission to know that like some horses come into our lives.
Yeah.
To connect in one way and some come to connect in another. And then also exploring the permission of, I guess I want to go back and touch on it, is that permission of knowing where we're at, because your body went through a lot. And then it's getting back in the saddle after that and giving yourself permission that that's normal.
Yeah.
For your body to be unsure, because I learned over the years in tuning in that like my back is not, as much as I love riding horses, my back is not built for riding horses. And if I've got something going on with my back, I know that I am naturally more nervous and tense in the saddle, strictly because a part of me understands when I'm not in peak physical shape, like it understands that, okay, your back can't quite handle what it normally would. Like this internal part of me picks that up. So I know that, and I work with that. And I think that there's like an awareness of it. And then I think support outside of the saddle. So you'll get this with your work, is that years ago I was riding a lot and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm feeling so nervous lately and dealing with a lot of tension. And I went, my body's got stuff going on. And I know this piece I just talked about, how when my body has stuff going on, that happens. It's not in my head, it's actually in my body. And I went to an osteopath and I had an adjustment. And like, it was so dramatic that she did a bunch of craniosacral work.
Yep.
I felt like my jaw was on the floor, like hanging open after. But when I got in the saddle, like I was like, I felt totally awkward walking around after. I looked normal, but it felt really like that dramatic feel, that shift, physical shift. But when I got in the saddle the next day, instantly that tension was gone. I was more relaxed because my body was back in alignment. And, so it's giving ourselves permission to have all these pieces and look at all the different ways we can support ourselves. Like, is this something that is mental performance? Is it my body needed support? Is it that something's going on with my horse and I need to actually get my horse support or let them have a lunge? Or like, there's so many different aspects to it. And I think giving ourselves permission to be curious and explore is probably the most important piece for me.
Yeah, it's I love that because it makes so much sense with the body work. Okay, I've had body work. It's made this big shift. And not all body work sessions are like that, as we both know.
Yeah.
But some
Yeah.
are where it's like, oh my gosh. That sense that sometimes we have a session where the integration happens, right? Like that sense that our body
Yeah.
goes, oh, I can use myself again in a way that creates a lot of safety for me, a lot of security for me, that my gymnastic ability has come back online, so to speak.
Yeah,
Right?
exactly.
And as someone with also back issues, I get that as well, because there are times where it's like, okay, I can't maybe ride a certain horse or in a certain way because of those, I don't want to call them limitations. It's not that, but because my
Mhm.
body realizes that that's not a good idea for me in those spaces, and that I might be more tense or bracy because of what I'm going through on that physical level. So yeah, I really appreciate that highlighting. And it's so interesting because I had like one of those sessions kind of on like Saturday, and then my lesson was Tuesday. So I do have this like inquiry in myself at this moment of like, like, was I able to experience that freedom, release, and joy, in part because I'd had this really profound osteopathic treatment a couple of days before that really helped my body integrate on a deeper level what I'd gone through during my health event. So that's kind of interesting that you've seen that as well. Like there's corroboration there as
Yeah.
well. Oh, amazing. So we're starting to come towards the end of our time together, and it's like flown by here. I would love one of my curiosities, and I think that you have probably had a lot of perspective on this, is how have you seen, or what kind of differences have you seen between people that are involved in the horse industry and people that are not when it comes to learning, shall we say, like you said, through horses? So, have you noticed distinctions between sort of, say, someone who comes in with sort of preconceived notions and maybe an agenda, and like, I know what I'm doing, and others that are coming to horses with sort of this fresh slate, this beginner's mind?
Yeah, I mean, it's not always true, but in some cases, I find people who are coming to me for an equine facilitated leadership development experience, for example, will be blown away by the subtle communication and connection with horses. And I think sometimes for people who've been in the horse industry and around horses for a long time, that can be more challenging to find that. And I don't think it's a bad thing. I just think it's that sometimes we've had so many experiences that we forget. We get a little disconnected from that magic of horses and of connecting with them and being with them. And yeah, so that's what I would say I see the difference is. And I know even as a horse person myself, one of the things I absolutely love is working with non-horse people for that reason,
Mm,
because it sometimes reminds me, because I have this ability to connect with them on a deep level, but because it now comes so naturally to me, I sometimes forget that other people don't always have that experience. So then when I'm with someone who suddenly like has a deep experience of connection with a horse,
mm,
it brings awe back for me. Like it reminds me
mm.
that I shouldn't take it for granted, and I think that's maybe a good lesson for all of us horse people, is that it's easy to just get going in the day to day and see the challenges that arise and kind of forget to connect with that awe,
Mm.
that reverence for being in their presence.
It's beautiful. It brings me back around to this idea of soul contracts, because to me, that's a part of the magic when we can take a step or two back and really look at, why are we together in this? Like, what has brought us together? What's the learning? Where are the growth edges? Where do we find our joy together? Like you say with Teddy, it's like we ride, right? And you saying that, it just like brought like goosebumps and tears to my eyes, because I see that for the two of you, right? It feels so resonant. I
Mm-hmm.
I wonder, in this, knowing that, going back to Breeze. So to me, Breeze, she had this presence of almost like an oracle or something. If that makes sense. But
it does.
I want to kind of finish here because I feel like she has something she wants to share with the people. So I wanted to ask you if there is anything that you sort of sense that wants to be sort of brought forward as a part of her legacy, as a part of what she shared with you or continues to share with you now.
Yeah, feels like such a loaded
Yeah,
question, but
sorry.
I think what I really, after Breeze passed away, sat with what I was learning and what I had learned. And it was this piece of like, I think what was so incredible about her was she just saw people.
Oh yeah.
She could see you and meet you exactly where you were, and she'd hold space there, but she did it in such like she was a leader, but her leadership
Oh yeah.
was so quiet and strong. And that's what I think, I've realized that I've really learned from her is actually to step back a little and be more willing to hold space and not have an agenda, is to like just see people and be with them where they really, and horses, where they are at, and not feel the need to try and, the word manipulate the situation comes up, so I'll say that, not try and just be like, oh, okay, and who do I need to be in this moment with this person? And sometimes that answer may be, I need to be very direct with the truth. Breeze was great at that. And other times it might be, no, I just need to be here in silence with them, or whatever that may be. So I don't know if that'll make sense, but that I think for me is what Breeze really embodied.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. I felt very privileged to be.
In short, I would say, sorry, in short, I just got this hit from her. It's like, think more about who we are being and less about what we're doing. So even if we are doing something, who are we being as we do it?
Oh, I love that.
And what's the impact of that? Yeah.
I absolutely love that. Thank you. Thank you. That's like the perfect spot to bring it to a close here today. And I really appreciate our conversation. This has been, lovely. Thank you.
Thank you. It's been so much fun.
Yay. So tell the people how they get in touch with you and find you.
Yes. I would say probably best to find me is on, because I'm not great at being super interactive on social media, is probably just at my website, which is Capall Coaching, which is CAPALL coaching.com. And then they can find the different, like, there's offerings that I have around the kind of mindful mental performance aspect, around my Harmonious Horsemanship online course, and then also with the equine facilitated leadership development work. So if they go there, then they can start to explore off to the other places.
That's awesome. Perfect. Okay, so head on over there. I will put the link on my wholehorse.ca page. So if you're looking for it, it will be there, along with Jodine's bio. And really appreciate all of you listening in today to our conversation. Thanks again, Jodine, for being here.
Thanks for having me.